Last year, I published The Loves of Theodore Roosevelt, The Women Who Created a President. And the book argues that Theodore Roosevelt, the most masculine president in the American memory, was actually the product of unsung and extraordinary women. And as I was thinking about this talk, I came across this great quote from Susan Dominus, who also just published a book on family dynamics and the secret power of siblings. Susan said, "Parents can kind of launch this arrow of ambition, but the people who focus that arrow and who help it land somewhere, maybe someplace suitable, very often those are siblings." And I love that metaphor. I would love to apply that metaphor to the Roosevelt family. The arrow of ambition for Theodore Roosevelt was launched by his mother and his father. Mittie, his mother, was a Southerner. She was a big personality. She could persuade a crowd, just like her son. She was actually the inspiration for Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. And after the premature death of Theodore Roosevelt's father, she said to her children, "You need to live for the living and not for the dead. You would dishonor the memory of your father if you did not live a life of purpose." So Mittie, Theodore Roosevelt's mother, taught him to persevere through physical and emotional pain. He also taught him how to connect with empathy to other people. Theodore Roosevelt's father, was a bit more stern. Was a member of Roosevelt and Sons, the family business, but really at heart he was a philanthropist. He was one of the founders of the American Museum of Natural History in New York. He was a founder of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and he founded the first orthopedic hospital in the entire country. He was a devout Christian, and he believed in the precept that to whom much is given, much is earned and deserved. And Theodore learned from his father, that he had an obligation to give back, civic service and leadership. These are the two that launched the arrow of ambition in Theodore Roosevelt. But who directed that arrow? His sisters. Starting with Bamie, his older sister. This is a letter from Bamie to Theodore Roosevelt in 1880. 1880, Theodore Roosevelt is 22 years old. He's just gotten married, engaged, and he says to his sister that she is a kind of feminine atlas with a small world on her shoulders, and such a squabbly, irritating small world at times too, at least that component part of it formed by the present scatterbrained writer. Now, Theodore Roosevelt in 1880 is not the Theodore Roosevelt you know from Mount Rushmore. He is a geeky naturalist in whose wake formaldehyde lingers. He has specimens in various stages of decay in his pockets from his taxidermy. And somehow, some way, he has won the heart of the most eligible bachelorette in all of Boston, Alice Hathaway Lee. And they have been married. But as you can see, in his own definition, he is a scattered-brained writer looking for purpose. So Theodore Roosevelt, when his wife becomes pregnant, famously comes out to North Dakota, to the Badlands, to hunt a bison. And he sends this letter to his wife, who is pregnant at home with their first child, Alice. And he has invested half of his inheritance, $14,000, the equivalent of millions today. And he says of that investment, "It will go a long way towards solving the problem that has puzzled us both a good deal at times. How am I to make more money as our needs increase?" She's pregnant, they're about to have a family. "And yet try to keep in a position from which I may be able at some future time again to go into public life or literary life." He's now 24 years old, and he doesn't know what he's going to do with his life. Just 4 months later, Theodore Roosevelt returns to his duties in Albany as a state legislator. He believes that his first child will be born on Valentine's Day, the day that they announced their engagement 4 years earlier. Instead, he gets a telegram that tells him the baby has been born on February 12th, and he makes arrangements to go back to New York City. Then a second telegram arrives. We don't know the contents of this telegram, but we know Theodore Roosevelt's reaction. His face went ashen white. He dropped the telegram and he ran to the train station in Albany and took an agonizing train ride back to his home in New York City, where he was greeted by his brother, who said, "There is a curse on this house. Mother is dying, and Alice is dying too." Theodore Roosevelt raced up to the third floor of the family home, and he held Alice in his arms until Bamie, his older sister, called him to the second floor to be at the deathbed of their mother, Mittie, who died at 2:30 in the morning of typhoid fever. He went back upstairs and held Alice for another 11 hours until she too died the next day of Bright's disease, a kidney disorder that had been exacerbated during the childbirth 2 days earlier. Theodore Roosevelt lost his mother and his wife on the same day in the same house, Valentine's Day, 1884. He fled again to the Badlands after writing an X in his diary, "The light has gone out of my life." He lived in the Badlands for the better part of 2 years. And why was he able to do that? His older sister, Bamie, stepped in. She sold the Roosevelt family home at 6 West 57th Street. She oversaw the construction of Sagamore Hill, what would become his permanent family home for over 30 years. And Bamie cared for the baby that was born 2 days before that tragic Valentine's Day for almost 2 years, as Theodore Roosevelt lived as a rancher and a cowboy in North Dakota. And he later said, of course, those experiences what enabled him to become president of the United States. He recovered, he mourned in nature, and that's why we're building the Theodore Roosevelt Presidential Library in Medora, North Dakota. But Bamie knew that arrow of ambition needed better direction. She brought him back to New York and reunited him, encouraged him to reunite with his childhood sweetheart, Edith. And they agreed to be married, and when they did, Bamie sent this letter to Edith, his fiancée. "It is such happiness to see him at his best once more. Ever since he has been out of politics in any form, it has been a real heart sorrow to me. For while he always made more of his life than any other man I knew, still with his strong nature, it was a permanent source of poignant regret that even at his early age, he should lose these years without the possibility of doing his best and most telling work." Politics, his sister said. That's where the arrow of ambition needs to land. And Bamie helped him every step of the way. Bamie gave Theodore the idea to become Civil Service Commissioner. Bamie introduced TR to Richard Harding Davis, the journalist who would follow him while he was NYPD Police Commissioner and later in the Spanish-American War. Bamie suggested to the McKinley campaign that, you know who would make a great Assistant Secretary of the Navy? My brother. Bamie was the president's secret advisor during the anthracite coal strike of 1902, the first time a president has ever intervened in a labor crisis in America. And Bamie's home in Washington, D.C. was known by the press as the Little White House. So often did Theodore go there to seek her advice. And not only did she help her brother Theodore, later she would lend that home to Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt, who would live there during their time in Washington before the White House. Eleanor Roosevelt, in fact, was asked whether her Aunt Bamie, had she been a man, would have been president of the United States. And Eleanor Roosevelt said, "Well, I think that might easily have been so." Eleanor added, "Bamie was much more calculating. Many women are quite able to think into the future, and there are women who, like Auntie Bai, are very good in making an analysis of a situation." Alice, the daughter who was born 2 days before that tragic Valentine's Day, was asked about her Aunt Bamie, and she said simply, "She's the maker of presidents," plural, both Theodore and Franklin. But Bamie had help too, in the form of her younger sister and Theodore's younger sister, Connie. Connie was Theodore's emotional outlet and sympathizer. Eleanor Roosevelt again said it best when she said, "If you wanted advice, you go to Bamie. If you want sympathy, you go to Connie." Connie snuck letters from Theodore from the Spanish-American War to the press to make him a global celebrity. When he was in the White House, Connie snuck information about the antics of this crazy White House family. It's from Connie that we know about Algonquin the pony going up the White House elevator, or Josiah the badger, the Roosevelt family pet. She knew that if the American public fell in love with the Roosevelt family, her brother would have greater political success. And it dates all the way back to his time as governor. When he was governor, Connie would hold these breakfasts, and the political bosses of New York would gather. And eventually they'd say, "Now everybody clear out. I want my time with Governor Roosevelt." And they'd leave, and Roosevelt would say, "Well, certainly my sister can say. I mean, she is but a woman, and she's so interested in my affairs." And so Connie would sit and knit in the corner, and she heard everything the political bosses said to the governor. And when they left, she would work with her brother. So influential was Connie during his governorship, Theodore Roosevelt himself said, "Haven't we had fun being governor of New York?" So one sister, according to Eleanor Roosevelt, would have been president were she a man, and the other was basically his co-governor. Theodore Roosevelt's parents shot the arrow of ambition, instilling in him civic duty and passionate storytelling. His sisters, his family, were the threads that tied that arrow together and directed it towards something suitable: politics. Now, we are all the product of those who believed in us. If we are fortunate in life, we have a mother or a brother, sisters, cousins, mentors, friends, spouses, someone who lifts us up and pushes us forward when life's inevitable troubles get us down. And I contend, in the life of Theodore Roosevelt, the secret to his success were his sisters. Thank you.